The rain had been falling in soft, relentless sheets all evening, tracing delicate rivulets along the tall windows of the abandoned mansion. Elena's heels clicked against the marble floor, each echo like a whisper in the vast emptiness. And she paused, her gaze drawn to a dark, spreading stain along the grand staircase. Her breath caught in her throat as her fingers trembled, hovering just above the cold banister. The blood glistened under the flickering chandelier light, and a shiver ran through her spine. Part fear, part disbelief. She had been summoned here by curiosity, or perhaps by something she didn't fully understand in herself. A pull toward the unknown that had always been dangerous and intoxicating. Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. Elena's chest tightened as she took a tentative step closer, eyes tracing the splatter that seemed almost purposeful, leading somewhere she couldn't yet see. The mansion had been abandoned for years, yet it carried the scent of old opulence, polished wood, fading velvet, the faint tang of cold stone. Somewhere in the shadows, a presence made itself known. Watching. Waiting. She should have turned around, run for safety, yet her feet remained rooted, curiosity mingling with the first stirrings of dread. A sudden click echoed behind her, startling her so violently that she nearly stumbled. Turning, she found the massive door closed, the latch quietly yet decisively fastened. And then he appeared, tall, impeccably dressed, with a presence that commanded the room even in silence. Adrian, the Mafia boss she had heard whispers of, the name spoken in both fear and reverence. His dark eyes were fixed on her, unreadable and intense, as if measuring her resolve, weighing her courage against some unseen standard. The dim light caressed the sharp angles of his face, and she felt, inexplicably, both threatened and drawn toward him. The faint scratch of paper under his hand as he moved suggested order, authority, and danger, all coiled tightly in one figure. Elena swallowed hard, feeling the sudden pull of vulnerability that she had long kept buried under layers of composure and independence. She had never imagined herself standing in a place like this, in a mansion that whispered secrets of power and fear, facing a man whose very presence seemed to demand obedience and attention. Her fingers brushed against the banister again, cold and slick beneath her touch, and she realized she was trembling. Not from the chill, but from anticipation, from the strange and immediate tension between them. A part of her mind screamed to leave, to escape into the rain-soaked night outside. Yet another part, more insidious, urged her forward, toward the mystery, toward the danger that felt almost electric in its allure. Adrian's voice finally broke the silence, low, controlled, and unexpectedly smooth. "You shouldn't be. Here," he said, and though the words were a warning, they carried a weight of curiosity, almost invitation. Eleanor's pulse quickened. His presence was a force, undeniable, suffocating, and yet somehow comforting in a way she could not name. She felt the first threads of a story weaving around them, fragile, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. She wanted to ask 1,000 questions at once, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she let her gaze follow the faint trail of blood upward, toward the unknown, toward what might be waiting at the top of the stairs. There was a life, or a secret, just beyond reach, and she knew that once she took that first step, nothing would be the same again. The rain outside tapped insistently against the glass, a slow drumbeat to match the racing of her heart. Adrian's shadow moved slightly, and she felt the tension between them thicken, like the air before a storm breaks fully. The mansion itself seemed to lean closer, its walls creaking as if in anticipation. Elena understood then that she was standing at a threshold, not just of the mansion, but of something far larger. A journey that would test her, frighten her, and awaken a desire she hadn't yet acknowledged. She inhaled deeply, the cold metallic scent of blood and old stone filling her senses, anchoring her in the moment. And as her foot finally touched the first step, the faintest tremor running through her body, she felt a pulse of inevitability. Somewhere in the shadowed corners of the mansion, secrets waited. And somewhere in those shadows, so did he, Adrian, a man who could either be her protector or the very danger she feared. Her heartbeat synced with the soft patter of rain against the windows, a rhythm that would guide her through the night, through the mysteries that were only beginning to unravel. The first step was taken, and in that instant, Elena realized there was no turning back. Elena's footfalls were soft against the polished marble as she moved further into the mansion, the faint glow of chandeliers above, casting shadows that danced like whispers across the walls. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood, and something else she couldn't name. A lingering trace of danger that clung to the corners of the grand rooms. Adrian followed silently behind, his presence close enough to feel but distant enough to remain unreadable. Every instinct in her screamed caution, yet her curiosity pressed her forward, each step an unspoken challenge to the invisible boundaries of this place. The mansion was a labyrinth of elegance and decay, hallways stretching endlessly, doors that creaked like sighs under the weight of years, and staircases that seemed to fold into themselves. Elena ran her hand along the ornate banister, smooth beneath her fingertips, tracing the carved patterns of roses and thorns. It struck her that the mansion mirrored Adrian himself, beautiful, controlled, and sharp-edged, with secrets hidden just beneath the surface. The silence between them was palpable, charged, yet not uncomfortable, more like the pause before a confession or a storm breaking. Adrian's gaze lingered on her, unblinking and analytical, as though he were cataloguing every tremor of her fingers, every quickened breath, every micro-expression that betrayed her unease. She tried not to meet his eyes directly, focusing instead on the small details of the mansion. The intricate moldings, the faded tapestries, the glimmer of silver handles dulled with age. Yet no matter where her eyes roamed, she could feel him, a tether she could not break, a gravitational pull she neither understood nor resisted. "You shouldn't touch everything," he said finally, his voice low, calm, but threaded with authority. Elena froze, the warmth of embarrassment creeping across her cheeks. She wanted to protest, to argue that her curiosity wasn't malicious, yet the words dissolved in the air between them. She realized with a jolt that his warning was not just about the mansion. It was about her, about boundaries she didn't fully understand yet, lines she hadn't yet realized were drawn. As they ascended another staircase, the light dimmed further, replaced by the flicker of wall sconces. Shadows pooled in the corners, hiding shapes and movements that made her pulse quicken. Somewhere above, a door was half open, revealing glimpses of rooms bathed in muted candlelight, dust motes swirling like ghosts in the warm glow. She thought she heard the faintest whisper of silk against wood, the softest echo of a footstep that was not her own. Her heart raced, and she forced herself to breathe slowly, to remain calm, to remind herself that she was simply exploring, that the danger was only imagined. Yet the mansion had its own rhythm, one that seemed to pulse with Adrian's presence. And soon Elena realized she could not ignore the subtle signs of life around her. A vase tilted slightly on a table as if someone had brushed past it. A faint scent of tobacco lingered where no fire burned, and the faint hum of a piano, distant yet unmistakable, threaded through the stillness. The walls were not just walls. They were witnesses, confidants, guardians of secrets that belonged to this house, and to Adrian himself. Her fingers trembled as she reached for a heavy velvet curtain, drawing it aside to reveal a study lined with books that smelled of leather and ink. Dust coated the edges of the shelves, but the titles were precise, curated, a reflection of meticulous control. Adrian stepped closer, and she could feel the subtle tension in the air, the unspoken understanding that she had entered a world she did not fully belong to. And yet, with each heartbeat, the pull between them deepened, a silent promise that she was not merely an intruder, but a participant in a story that had been waiting for her arrival. He moved behind her then, so close that she could feel the warmth of his coat brushing against her shoulder. "Some things in this house are not for visitors," he murmured, almost to himself. And Elena sensed both warning and a strange note of confession in his tone. She wanted to respond, to ask questions, but the words lodged in her throat again, replaced by the rising awareness that the mansion, Adrian and herself were now linked in a fragile tension, a delicate balance of curiosity, caution, and undeniable attraction. In that suspended moment, Eleanor realized that this mansion was more than a place of power. It was a reflection of the unseen walls each of them carried. Her past, her fears, her yearning for something beyond the ordinary, all pressed against her chest like a living weight. And Adrian, unreadable, compelling, dangerous, was both the barrier and the doorway to something she could not yet name, something she might not survive unscathed, yet could not resist pursuing. The shadows shifted again, the candles flickered, and in the hush of the mansion she understood that she had stepped across a line she could never step back from. Elena's fingers lingered on the spine of a leather-bound book, tracing the embossed letters with a mixture of reverence and unease. Dust motes danced in the narrow beam of candlelight as if the room itself were alive, breathing quietly around her. She felt Adrian's gaze on her again, steady, unyielding, yet not accusatory. There was a weight to him, a gravity she could not name, that seemed to anchor her in a world simultaneously luxurious and perilous. Her mind, however, drifted, not to the mansion, not to the blood-stained stairs, but to fragments of her own past, whispers she had long tried to ignore. Memories of her family flickered unbidden, laughter that had once filled a sunlit kitchen, voices now replaced by silence, promises broken, trust betrayed, and a longing for safety she had chased across cities and empty apartments. The ache of those old wounds blended with the current unease of this mansion, creating a peculiar tension that wrapped tightly around her chest. She realized that fear and curiosity were not the only forces at play. There was something more insistent, something that felt like destiny brushing its fingertips against her life. Adrian moved with quiet precision, opening a cabinet filled with neatly arranged letters, envelopes yellowed with age. He handled them with care, as though each contained a fragment of his own soul. Elena watched him, noticing the subtle line of his jaw, the brief exhalation of breath that softened his otherwise rigid posture. There was an intimacy here, a vulnerability masked by control, and it drew her in against her better judgment. She wanted to ask the questions bubbling in her mind, yet fear and propriety kept her lips sealed. "You wonder why you're here," he said suddenly, voice low, threaded with something that bordered on weariness. Elena startled slightly, realizing he had spoken without her hearing him approach. His words were not accusatory. They were a statement, a recognition of the unspoken. She did not answer immediately, caught between her instincts to flee and her inexplicable pull toward him. The mansion's shadows seemed to lean closer, holding their breath with her, pressing the silence into something tangible, almost sacred. She took a slow step closer to the letters, drawn by the stories they seemed to contain. One fell open under her touch, revealing handwriting delicate and precise, a voice from another time. Adrian's eyes followed her, a storm of unreadable emotion simmering beneath calm restraint. She recognized the subtle weight of history in these objects, the echoes of choices that had been made, loyalties pledged and broken, sacrifices given in silence. And though she did not yet understand his world fully, she felt it wrap around her, tightening the invisible threads that bound them together. Her mind drifted again to her own secrets, the letters she had hidden, the truths she had kept buried. Elena had learned long ago that vulnerability could be exploited, that love could be a weapon as easily as a bomb. Yet standing here, in this mansion of power and shadows, she sensed that her walls might be meeting someone else's. A man who carried burdens heavier than she had imagined, whose quiet strength masked fractures she could almost feel beneath the surface. Each glance, each small gesture between them carried a weight, a subtle acknowledgement that neither of them could truly hide from the other. Adrian placed a hand lightly on the edge of the cabinet, brushing dust from the wood, and Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. There was a rhythm to him, measured, deliberate, a cadence that seemed to echo the unspoken heartbeat of the mansion itself. "History isn't always kind," he murmured, almost to himself, and Eleanor realized he was speaking of more than the letters, more than the walls around them. He spoke of choices, of duty, of the impossible lines drawn by circumstance and blood. Her gaze met his, and for a fleeting moment she glimpsed the man beneath the armor, the man shaped by loss, expectation, and necessity. A distant sound, footsteps perhaps, or the creak of a door settling, pulled Elena from the intimacy of that moment. The spell of the mansion's quiet was broken, replaced by the reminder that danger and intrigue were never far away. She straightened, taking a step back, and felt the pull of reality press against the lingering warmth of proximity. Yet the traces of connection, fragile and unspoken, had been set in motion. She understood that the past, both hers and Adrian's, was not a closed book. It lived here, in these walls, in these shadows, shaping the delicate tension that now existed between them. As she allowed herself one more lingering glance at the letters, at the careful precision of Adrian's movements, she felt the first threads of understanding weave through her. The mansion was more than a house. It was a repository of histories, of secrets and regrets, of choices that had carved the paths they now walked. And in this quiet convergence of past and present, fear and fascination, she sensed the beginning of something inevitable, an intimacy that would test them both, that would awaken desires she had long kept subdued. The candles flickered, shadows stretched longer, and somewhere deep in the house, time itself seemed to pause, holding them in a delicate balance between what had been and what might yet be. The storm outside had grown fierce, rain lashing against the tall windows in relentless sheets, turning the night into a blur of silver and shadow. Elena drew her coat tighter around her shoulders, the chill seeping through the fabric. Yet it was nothing compared to the tremor that ran through her chest. Candlelight flickered across the walls, throwing their shadows into a soft, trembling dance, and the distant rumble of thunder seemed to resonate with the unsteady rhythm of her heartbeat. Every instinct told her to retreat, to find the safety of the mansion's exit, but a quieter, more insistent force held her in place. Adrian, standing nearby, silent and unreadable, yet impossibly magnetic. She could feel his presence like a pulse against the air around her, close enough that even the slightest movement sent subtle shivers along her spine. The way his coat brushed her sleeve, accidental or deliberate, stirred a tension she hadn't known she could feel. A dangerous warmth that threatened to undo the careful control she had maintained over her emotions. For a long moment, neither spoke. The storm outside seemed to echo the storm building within the room, a mirrored tempest of anticipation, desire, and unspoken words. "Why are you really here?" His voice cut through the ambient roar, low, deliberate, and intimate, carrying an edge that made her inhale sharply. It was not accusation, but curiosity, a question that seemed to probe beyond her words, beyond the polite facades she had learned to wear. Eleanor hesitated, knowing the answer might reveal more than she intended. Not just her presence, but the vulnerability she had carefully hidden from the world. And yet, the question demanded honesty, a confrontation with the pull she had felt from the moment she first stepped into this mansion. Her eyes met his briefly, and in them she saw shadows of past regrets, of burdens carried silently, mirrored against her own faint echoes of longing. She felt a flicker of recognition, a sense that perhaps he, too, understood the delicate tension between fear and fascination, control and surrender. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, each gust of wind and beat of rain reinforcing the intensity between them, as if nature itself conspired to heighten the unspoken connection. A candle wavered and nearly went out, casting the room into near darkness, and Eleanor felt a sudden surge of courage, or perhaps recklessness, propel her forward. She closed the space between them in a single step, careful yet deliberate, and the air around them shifted, charged with an electric intimacy. Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly, observing, calculating, yet for the first time, the mask of absolute control slipped ever so subtly, revealing a vulnerability that made her pulse quicken. There was a precarious rhythm to their interaction, each movement weighted with significance, each breath shared without words, yet heavy with implication. The storm's fury pressed against the windows, rattling panes, and the distant boom of thunder punctuated the unspoken tension. Elena's hands trembled, partly from the cold, partly from the nearness of him, from the pull of something she could neither name nor resist. Her instincts screamed caution, warning her of the danger in allowing this intimacy, this quiet collision of emotions. Yet a deeper, quieter desire urged her to linger, to explore the delicate thread that connected them in this charged, private world. Adrian shifted slightly, a subtle movement that drew her gaze without a word. A silent acknowledgement of the storm they both felt, outside and within. The mansion seemed to lean closer around them, its walls breathing, holding witness to this fragile yet potent encounter. Eleanor realized then that nothing in the world outside this room mattered, that the rain, the thunder, the shadows, they were all mere background to the electricity that passed between them. A soft sigh escaped her lips, almost involuntary, and Adrian's attention sharpened as if he had heard the faintest crack in her composure. His voice, when it came again, was near a whisper, intimate and compelling. "You're not like anyone I've known." Those words hung in the charged air, weighty, urgent, and laden with the promise of something neither fully understood yet. She felt her heartbeat accelerate, a mix of fear and yearning, as the storm raged on outside, a mirror to the one building inside her chest, one that refused to be silenced or denied. In that room, with rain hammering against the windows and shadows flickering across their faces, the world had narrowed to the space between them. Elena felt, for the first time, the dizzying pull of surrender, to desire, to uncertainty, to the fragile tension that tethered them together. And as the lightning illuminated the room in sudden, stark brilliance, she understood that nothing beyond these walls could touch them, that the storm inside might be the only reality that mattered, at least for now. The mansion felt alive in a way that unsettled and fascinated Eleanor simultaneously, each hallway and corridor resonating with echoes of decisions made long before she had arrived. She followed a faint sound, a soft, deliberate shuffle of footsteps, that led her to a smaller sitting room tucked away behind a heavy oak door. There, seated in a high-backed chair near the fire, was a woman whose presence seemed to calm the storm that had roared inside. Elena, only moments ago. Sophia, Adrian's sister, looked up as Elena entered, her eyes sharp yet not unkind, studying her with an intensity that made Elena feel simultaneously scrutinized and accepted. The firelight danced across Sophia's features, highlighting a strength Elena could almost feel radiating from her. "You're far from home," Sophia said, her voice gentle but precise, the kind of voice that demanded honesty without forcing it. Elena nodded, unsure of what she could or should say, the weight of the mansion pressing against her like the memory of a warning she could not yet place. Every instinct told her to retreat, to remain cautious. Yet something about Sophia's calm, measured presence drew her in, offering a fragile bridge between fear and understanding. They spoke cautiously at first, Eleanor's words halting as she tried to navigate a conversation that felt both intimate and dangerous. Sophia's gaze never wavered. It was steady, unwavering, as if she could see the tremors in Eleanor's heart and the questions she had not yet formed. Slowly, Eleanor found herself sharing fragments of her life, stories of small betrayals, of trust given too easily, of the longing for someone who understood her without judgment. Each word felt like a key turning in a lock, opening spaces inside her she had kept carefully sealed. Sophia listened with a patience that Eleanor found almost disarming. She spoke little, but when she did, it was with a precision that carried weight. "You should know," she said finally. "The mansion is as dangerous as it is beautiful. And he, Adrian, he trusts very few. If he trusts you, it's not lightly." The warning hung in the air, a mixture of protection and challenge. Yet Elena felt no condescension in the words. Instead, there was a sense that Sophia offered both insight and quiet reassurance, a tether in a world otherwise threaded with shadows and uncertainty. Elena's eyes drifted around the room, taking in the details she had overlooked. A small portrait of Adrian as a boy, the careful arrangement of books and objects, the faint scent of perfume that lingered like a memory. Each detail spoke of a life carefully curated, of secrets guarded fiercely, of love and pain intertwined in ways Eleanor could sense but not yet fully comprehend. She realized then that Sophia was more than a confidant. She was a guide through the intricate web of loyalty, fear, and emotion that defined the mansion and the people within it. The conversation shifted subtly, touching on Adrian without forcing intimacy, exploring the tensions that simmered beneath the surface. Elena learned of the burdens he carried, the weight of family expectation and the harsh necessities of power. Yet there was also a quiet humanity in Sophia's words, a recognition that beneath the reputation, beneath the control and danger, was a man capable of depth, loyalty, and unexpected tenderness. Elena's chest tightened at the thought. The image of Adrian, both fearsome and vulnerable, settling in her mind, impossible to ignore. Outside, the rain continued its relentless patter, but inside, a fragile warmth had begun to take hold. Eleanor felt a sense of being seen. Not fully, not without caution, but enough to allow a tentative trust to form. The walls of the mansion, once oppressive and daunting, seemed for the first time to offer sanctuary. At least in the small room, in this shared space where secrets could be spoken without judgment. Sophia's presence was steady, a reminder that even in the world Adrian commanded, alliances existed and hearts could find solace amid danger. Elena's gaze returned to Sophia, lingering on the calm, intelligent eyes that held more than just observation. They held understanding, recognition, and the faintest hint of hope. "Thank you," Elena murmured, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. Sophia inclined her head slightly, a gesture that conveyed both acknowledgement and permission. Permission to explore, to learn, to step closer to the man in the world that had brought her here. And in that quiet, unspoken exchange, Eleanor felt the first stirrings of a courage she had not known she possessed. The courage to navigate the invisible walls of trust and desire that now surrounded her. When the firelight shifted, casting new shadows across the room, Elena understood that this meeting, brief as it might have seemed, had changed the course of her evening, perhaps even her life. The mansion was still vast, its secrets still veiled, yet she no longer felt entirely alone. A subtle thread had been woven between her and Sophia, a thread that offered guidance, protection, and insight, and most importantly, a quiet reassurance that, Whatever lay ahead with Adrian, she would not face it entirely unarmed. The storm outside raged on, but inside, a tentative warmth began to grow, fragile yet undeniable, marking the first step toward connection, understanding, and the slow unraveling of a bond that was only just beginning to form. Elena lingered in the quiet of the mansion long after her conversation with Sophia had ended, the firelight dying to a low amber glow that flickered across the walls. She moved slowly, each step measured, as if the marble floor itself demanded respect. A silent witness to every heartbeat. The mansion seemed to exhale around her, the shadows stretching and contracting like a living thing, carrying the scent of old wood, polished stone, and something indefinably familiar. An echo of Adrian's presence. She realized, with a mixture of dread and fascination, that every corner, every room, carried traces of him. The way his coat had brushed past a chair, the faint echo of his footsteps, the lingering warmth of authority and restraint. Adrian appeared then, silent as ever, in the doorway, his figure framed by the dim light from the hall. Elena felt a sudden tightening in her chest, a flutter of anticipation mingled with hesitation. He did not speak, and she did not speak, yet the air between them vibrated with an unspoken communication that was both tense and intimate. It was a silence that held meaning, a language written not in words, but in glances, breaths, and subtle shifts of posture. For the first time, Elena understood the weight of presence, the way a man could command the space around him without uttering a sound, and the way she, in turn, responded without realizing it. They moved through the mansion in this quiet synchrony, exploring rooms bathed in the gentle flicker of candles, listening to the soft rumble of distant thunder and the occasional drip of water echoing through the corridors. Elena's fingers brushed against the textured wallpaper, tracing patterns she had never seen, feeling the pulse of the house as if it were alive and attuned to their steps. Adrian followed just behind, the faintest shadow of warmth radiating from him, close enough to sense, distant enough to respect. Each room, each artifact, seemed to pull them closer together while simultaneously reminding her of the boundaries they could not yet cross. A grand piano in the corner of a sitting room caught Elena's eye, its keys gleaming faintly in the low light. She lifted her hand hesitantly, pressing one note, then another, the sound fragile, yet insistent. Adrian stepped closer, his presence enveloping her without constraint, and she felt her breath hitch, a tremor passing through her fingers as if the piano itself recognized the tension in the air. His eyes met hers, steady and intense, but he said nothing. The silence between them deepened, carrying the weight of unspoken thoughts, desires restrained, and emotions carefully held in check. They sat together by the window after, watching the rain streak down the glass, the storm outside a muted mirror of the storm that churned quietly in their hearts. Elena felt the brush of his coat against her arm, the faint warmth of his shoulder near hers, and each subtle contact seemed magnified in the hush of the room. Words were unnecessary here. The silence was both binding and revealing, drawing them into a fragile intimacy without forcing confession or acknowledgement. She sensed his guarded vulnerability, glimpses of the man beneath the armor of power, a man burdened by duty, yet capable of tenderness that he had never allowed anyone to see. Elena's hand rested lightly on the windowsill, tracing the path of the rain as it spiraled downward, each droplet a rhythm to match her thoughts. The mansion, in all its grandeur and shadows, felt less like a fortress now, and more like a cocoon, safe, secret, and suffused with quiet possibility. In the hush of the room, with the storm raging outside, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The slow, inexorable pull she felt toward Adrian, the tension between fear and desire, and the realization that neither of them needed to speak to understand the depth of connection forming between them. As the night deepened, Elena understood that this silence was not emptiness. It was a bond, a bridge, a binding force that tethered them in a way words could never achieve. Each glance, each breath, each subtle movement carried weight. And in this delicate equilibrium, she discovered something she had not expected. A sense of trust, fragile but undeniable, stretching between them like a thread of light in the shadowed mansion. For the first time since she had stepped inside, she allowed herself to breathe fully, to exist in the space that was uniquely theirs, bound not by words, but by the quiet understanding that something profound had begun to take root. The storm continued its relentless symphony outside, but inside, in the muted glow of candlelight, Eleanor felt the first tentative stirrings of hope, intimacy, and a connection that promised both danger and redemption. And as she turned to glance at Adrian, standing quietly in the corner, she realized that the mansion's unseen walls were not merely barriers. They were spaces where trust, curiosity, and the faintest hint of love could grow, even in the shadow of uncertainty. The morning light crept hesitantly through the tall, arched windows, casting long, uncertain shadows across the marble floor. Elena had not slept well. The storm from the night before seemed to linger in her mind, its echoes tangled with the tension she had felt in the quiet hours with Adrian. She wandered through the mansion's corridors, trying to shake the lingering sense of unease, but the atmosphere pressed against her, heavy with secrets and the unspoken weight of loyalty and deception. Even the soft hum of distant footsteps carried a subtle caution, a reminder that this house was never truly empty. Elena's curiosity led her to a small study tucked behind the main hallway, a room she had not noticed before. Drawn by the faint scent of ink and paper, she found a drawer slightly ajar, the lock worn, the edge of a letter peeking from within. Her heart thudded against her chest as she hesitated, fingers trembling over the envelope. Something about it called to her, an irresistible pull that mingled fear with a desperate need to know. With a cautious breath, she opened it, revealing the carefully penned words inside, the familiar ink carrying a weight she could feel in her bones. As she read, her stomach knotted and a cold tremor ran down her spine. The letter was not intended for her, yet the words cut through her carefully maintained composure. Promises broken, decisions hidden, and intentions that had been carefully concealed from her. It was as though a shard of truth had been thrust into her chest, a revelation that shook the fragile trust she had begun to place in Adrian. Memories of the last nights, the stolen glances, the silent communication, the quiet intimacies, clashed violently with this new knowledge, leaving her reeling with a mixture of hurt, confusion, and anger. Adrian appeared in the doorway then, silent as always, yet Elena could feel his presence fill the room like a tide. His eyes darkened slightly when they fell upon the letter in her hand, and for a moment the space between them was charged with accusation, defense, and unspoken emotion. She wanted to throw the paper aside, to demand explanations, yet the words lodged in her throat, heavy with betrayal. Every instinct told her that trust, once broken, could not be mended easily, yet a part of her clung desperately to the man she had begun to see in fleeting glimpses of vulnerability. "You shouldn't have seen that," he said finally, his voice low, controlled, threaded with something Elena could not place. Regret, frustration, maybe even a hint of fear. She held the letter closer, the edges trembling in her grip, and her eyes met his, searching for a truth that seemed just beyond reach. His presence, once a source of intrigue and magnetic pull, now carried a weight that threatened to crush her fragile hope. She realized then that the mansion, for all its grandeur, could also be a prison of secrets, and that the walls surrounding Adrian were not just for protection. They were barriers to intimacy, walls that she had just begun to breach. Her chest tightened as she tried to speak, the words faltering under the weight of hurt and disbelief. Why didn't you tell me?" she finally asked, voice barely above a whisper, laden with betrayal. Adrian's gaze flickered, the mask of absolute control slipping momentarily, revealing a glimpse of vulnerability she had not seen before. He stepped closer, the space between them charged, yet the tension was not entirely hostile. It was the unspoken acknowledgement of mistakes, of choices that had caused pain, of the delicate fragility of trust now fractured. The room seemed to shrink around them, the walls leaning in with the weight of their emotions, while the letter remained a silent witness to the fracture forming between them. Elena felt a mix of longing and anger, the ache of wanting to believe in him colliding with the sting of deception. Each heartbeat was a drum of regret and uncertainty, a rhythm she could not escape, and yet, despite the betrayal, the thread of connection remained, fragile but unbroken, pulling her toward understanding even when her mind screamed otherwise. Adrian reached out then, a tentative movement, his fingers hovering near hers without touching, as if afraid that any contact might shatter the fragile equilibrium further. The silence between them was deafening, heavy with unspoken apologies and unshed tears. Elena realized that this moment, painful as it was inevitable, a test of their bond, a measure of how deep desire, trust, and vulnerability could go before the weight of hidden truths pulled them apart. And in the stillness of the mansion, with the morning light casting sharp lines across their faces, she understood that love, however slow and dangerous, would never be simple, never without pain, sacrifice, and the courage to confront betrayal head-on. Elena fled into the storm without a plan, the rain lashing against her coat, soaking through the fabric and plastering her hair to her cheeks. Each step was frantic, splashing through puddles that mirrored the gray skies above. Yet the storm outside felt nothing compared to the tempest inside her chest. Betrayal gnawed at her, a sharp ache that had no relief, and every memory of Adrian's gaze, his quiet presence, now felt like a cruel echo. The mansion loomed behind her, a fortress of secrets she had only begun to glimpse, and with each retreating step, the distance between them became a chasm of silence and unspoken regret. The streets were empty, the city muted beneath the steady drum of rainfall. Elena's boots splashed over slick cobblestones, but even as her lungs burned and her muscles ached, she could not outrun the mix of longing and fury that tangled inside her. Adrian's presence lingered like a shadow at her back, a magnetic pull she could not dismiss even as anger flared. She replayed the moment she had found the letter, the way his eyes had flickered with something almost human, something she wanted to trust, but could not. The weight of what she had uncovered pressed against her ribs, a relentless reminder that nothing between them could remain simple. Her mind wandered to the nights they had shared in silence, to the delicate intimacy of glances and proximity that had felt like permission to breathe, to exist, to trust. Those memories now burned with a bittersweet ache, each one a dagger sharpened by the discovery of secrets she hadn't known she would uncover. She cursed herself for her curiosity, for stepping closer, for letting the fragile thread of connection grow strong enough to feel like hope. And yet, even as she cursed, a part of her could not deny the pull, the magnetic, dangerous draw toward Adrian that had been impossible to ignore since the moment she first stepped into the mansion. The rain blurred the world, turning streetlights into smeared orbs of amber, shadows into ghosts that danced at the edge of her vision. Eleanor pressed forward, heart hammering, tears mingling with rain, a mix of grief and longing that left her breathless. Each step seemed to echo against the walls of memory, each puddle reflecting not just the storm above but the turbulence inside her. She had never imagined that love, desire, and betrayal could coexist with such fierce intensity, nor that a man could occupy her mind and heart so completely while remaining a mystery she could not fully touch. She stumbled briefly, catching herself against a wrought iron fence, and for a moment the storm seemed to mock her, whipping her hair and soaking her through, reflecting the chaos of her emotions. Eleanor leaned against the cold metal, shivering, and let herself feel the emptiness that stretched between them, a silence heavy with longing and frustration. She thought of Adrian, of the way his presence had both grounded and unmoored her, and she wondered if he felt the same tug of impossibility, the same ache of connection torn by secrets and duty. Somewhere deep in the night, she realized that the pain was more than betrayal. It was recognition of what could be lost, of love that demanded courage, of hearts stretched thin between hope and despair. The storm raged around her, yet inside, a quieter, relentless ache persisted, a yearning that refused to be ignored. Each raindrop felt like a mirror to her own brokenness, each gust of wind a reminder that the world had not softened its edges for her grief. And still, despite the fear, despite the heartbreak, she could not erase the memory of him. The warmth, the intensity, the fragile promise that lingered in their silences and unspoken exchanges. Hours passed, though she did not mark the time, each one heavy with the pulse of the storm and the thrum of memory. She pressed on through the streets, soaked to the bone, alone with the ache of loss and the bitter sweetness of desire unfulfilled. Somewhere beneath the relentless downpour, she understood that this separation, as painful as it was, would shape the bond between them, leaving scars and longing alike. And in that recognition, she felt the faint, almost imperceptible stirrings of hope. Hope that what had been broken could, perhaps, one day be healed, even if only through the storm that now raged around her heart. Elena returned to the mansion the following evening, rain replaced by a pale, trembling moonlight that cast long, uncertain shadows across the grand halls. Her coat was still damp from the night before, her hair curling in rebellious waves, and a sense of unease settled over her like a weight she could not shake. The letter she had found still burned in her mind, its words lingering with an almost tangible sting, and yet she could not resist returning. Some part of her needed clarity, needed to confront the hidden truths that now shaped every thought she had of Adrian. She moved cautiously through the hallways, every step measured, the silence around her thick and watchful. The mansion seemed almost alive, attuned to the tremor of her emotions, the echo of her footsteps magnified against the polished floors. Elena's heart pounded in her chest, a drum of anticipation and fear, as she approached the study where Adrian often retreated in solitude. The door was slightly ajar, as if inviting her into the sanctum of secrets, and she hesitated, knowing that crossing this threshold could reveal truths that might change everything between them. Inside, she found evidence she had not expected, documents strewn across a polished desk, photographs tucked beneath folders, and notes that hinted at alliances, betrayals, and family dynamics she had only glimpsed in fragments. Adrian sat nearby, his posture rigid, hands folded in contemplation, and when he noticed her, his eyes darkened with a mixture of caution and something unreadable. Elena swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe steadily, as the reality of what she had discovered began to settle over her like a heavy fog. The revelations were layered, each detail unfolding a story of power, obligation, and sacrifice that she could barely comprehend. She saw the threads of Adrian's life laid bare. Debts owed, enemies placated, loyalty demanded at the expense of personal desire. And beneath it all, she saw a vulnerability carefully hidden. A man shaped by circumstance yet struggling to maintain a semblance of humanity. The mansion, once a backdrop of grandeur and threat, became a repository of the complexity of his existence, a mirror reflecting the weight he carried silently. Her pulse quickened as she realized the depth of deception she had unknowingly been walking into. Not all of it was malicious. Some were necessities, choices made in shadow and silence, yet the effect on her was profound. Trust had been tested, boundaries crossed, and emotions entangled in a web she could not yet navigate. Every glance Adrian offered now seemed laden with double meaning. Words unsaid, apologies withheld, promises complicated by circumstance. Eleanor felt a pull, both toward understanding and away from the danger inherent in knowing too much. Adrian's voice broke the silence, calm yet firm. I didn't want you to see this. Some truths are burdens too heavy for anyone else to bear. Elena's gaze met his, searching for honesty, for explanation, for a thread she could grasp in the shifting landscape of secrets. She felt the tension tighten, a storm coiling between them, as though the mansion itself recognized the precipice on which they now stood. Every document, every photograph, every folded note was a testament to the life he had led. A life that had spared no room for weakness, yet now demanded her presence, her understanding, and perhaps her forgiveness. She moved closer, hesitant yet compelled, as if drawn by gravity toward the complexity of him. I want to understand, she whispered, voice low and trembling, carrying both determination and vulnerability. Adrian's eyes softened for the briefest instant, the armor of control slipping enough to reveal the man beneath. The weight of choice, the burden of responsibility, and the silent acknowledgement of the effect she had on him. It was a moment suspended between revelation and reconciliation, fragile yet potent. And Elena realized that understanding this world, these truths, was the first step toward bridging the distance that had formed between them. Hours passed in tense silence, broken only by the turning of papers and the quiet rustle of folds revealing carefully guarded history. Elena absorbed each fragment of truth, recognizing both the necessity of concealment and the vulnerability that lay beneath. And as the night deepened, she understood that the path forward was fraught with challenge. That trust must be rebuilt in the shadow of what had been hidden. Yet despite the weight of revelations, despite the ache of betrayal and longing, a fragile hope began to take root. A hope that connection, however tested, might endure, and that the bond forming between them could survive the unveiling of secrets long held in darkness. Elena sat alone in her room that night, the soft glow of a single lamp illuminating the scattered notes and memories she had collected throughout the mansion. Shadows stretched across the walls, distorted by the flickering light, mirroring the uncertainty twisting inside her. Each revelation from the study weighed heavily on her mind, leaving her torn between the man she was beginning to understand and the dangerous world he inhabited. Trust had become a fragile thread, and she feared every step she took might unravel it completely. Her thoughts returned to Adrian, to the intensity of his gaze, the careful control that masked vulnerability, and the sudden flashes of tenderness she had glimpsed. Doubt gnawed at her heart. She questioned his intentions, his loyalties, even the quiet pull that had drawn her into his orbit. Was it genuine affection, or a calculated mask crafted by someone who had mastered the art of influence and control? Elena's fingers traced the edge of the letter she had found, feeling the inked words imprint themselves on her skin. A reminder that secrets could alter perceptions as much as truths. The mansion was silent around her, yet Eleanor sensed the weight of unseen observers in the quiet corners, the subtle signs of life tucked into the shadows. The echo of footsteps from distant halls, the soft hum of the heating, the faint flicker of candlelight in neighboring rooms, all seemed to emphasize the isolation she felt in her doubts. Her mind wandered to the people who might manipulate, deceive, or betray, and she realized the precariousness of her position in Adrian's world. Fear intertwined with desire, and she could not separate the two. The very man who captivated her also represented the danger she feared most. A soft knock at the door startled her, and she froze, pulse racing. Adrian stepped inside, the lamplight highlighting the sharp lines of his face, the depth of his eyes, the careful restraint in his movements. He did not speak immediately, simply observing her as though measuring her resolve. Elena's heart pounded, torn between anger at the secrets, yearning for connection, and the silent acknowledgement that some part of her had never stopped believing in him. The tension in the room was almost tangible, thick with unspoken questions, unanswered confessions, and the fragile threads of trust still stretched between them. "You're questioning me," Adrian said at last, voice low, steady, yet carrying the weight of understanding. Elena's throat tightened, and she could not deny it, could not mask the doubt that had grown like ivy around her heart. "I have to," she admitted softly, eyes locked on his, searching for any sign that she might be wrong in feeling, both drawn and wary. "I need to know where your loyalties lie, and if any of this," she gestured toward the room, the mansion, the documents, "is just manipulation." Adrian's gaze softened slightly, yet the edge of distance remained. "I have made choices," he said. "Choices that may appear cruel, even secretive. But my loyalty, my concern, is yours, more than you realize." His words were careful, deliberate, yet they carried a sincerity that Elena found difficult to dismiss. Doubt still lingered, a shadow in her chest. But there was also a glimmer of clarity, a faint reassurance that beneath the fortress of control, something genuine existed. The night deepened around them, shadows lengthening as Elena and Adrian remained in tense proximity. Each movement, each pause, carried significance, and she felt the slow unraveling of her doubts alongside the persistent pull of desire. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, witnessing the delicate balance of suspicion and trust, fear and attraction that tethered them together. She realized that the shadows of doubt were not merely obstacles. They were tests, shaping the contours of understanding, demanding courage, patience, and a willingness to confront the truth behind appearances. Hours passed in quiet reflection, broken only by the faint creak of the mansion settling around them. Elena's chest ached with the conflicting emotions that had taken root, the fragile balance of love and uncertainty stretching taut. And yet, despite the shadows, despite the lingering questions, she could feel the subtle threads of connection endure. Fragile, uncertain, but undeniable. In the quiet of the night, with the mansion as witness, she understood that doubt could coexist with desire, that trust could be rebuilt, and that the path forward, though shadowed, was illuminated by the possibility of understanding and, perhaps, forgiveness. The air in the mansion was thick with tension, the silence heavy, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves were holding their collective breath. Eleanor walked through the dimly lit hall, each step measured, yet every heartbeat echoed with uncertainty and longing. The storm from earlier nights had passed, leaving only a cold, damp residue in the marble corridors, a mirror to the chills settling deep within her chest. Memories of fleeting intimacy with Adrian, of glances and near confessions, now felt distant and fragile, stretched thin over the growing chasm of doubt and misunderstanding that had formed between them. Adrian appeared at the end of the hallway, his posture rigid, his eyes shadowed with the weight of unspoken consequences. Elena's chest tightened at the sight, torn between yearning and fear, the ache of unspoken words pressing against her ribs. Their proximity did not ease her tension. Instead, it magnified the fractures that had begun to form in the fragile trust they had built. Each glance carried weight, each measured breath a subtle negotiation between reconciliation and separation. The mansion itself seemed to lean closer, amplifying the intensity of the moment, as if the walls bore witness to the inevitable fall approaching. Elena stopped before him, her hands trembling slightly, unsure whether to reach for understanding or retreat in self-preservation. Adrian's expression softened for a brief instant, revealing vulnerability beneath his usual controlled exterior. But the shadow of duty and secrecy remained, unyielding. The letter, the revelations, the hidden truths, they had all converged, creating a storm that neither of them could easily navigate. And in that convergence, Eleanor understood the depth of the consequences they now faced. Love, desire, and trust colliding with betrayal, secrecy, and the unrelenting demands of Adrian's world. Words faltered on her lips, heavy with the weight of emotion and fear. I don't know if I can, she began, but the sentence broke, swallowed by the suffocating quiet. Adrian's hand hovered near hers, the slightest movement hesitant, as if reaching might either mend or sever the fragile thread holding them together. Her gaze dropped to the marble floor, heart pounding, aware that the delicate balance of trust they had nurtured was teetering dangerously. The room seemed suspended in time, each second stretching endlessly, charged with the anticipation of what might be lost. Suddenly, a subtle shift in Adrian's demeanor, a tension tightening in his jaw, reminded Eleanor of the life he led outside these walls. A life defined by power, danger, and unyielding expectations. The reality of his world pressed in, the mansion's safety a thin veneer over the chaos that existed beyond. Eleanor felt the sting of fear and resignation entwined, realizing that even in moments of connection, the outside forces, the burdens, and the secrets could not be ignored. The fall, she understood, was inevitable. Not necessarily a collapse of affection, but a fracture of certainty, of peace, of fragile equilibrium. Her chest ached with the recognition that love, no matter how profound, could coexist with danger, betrayal, and heartbreak. Each glance at Adrian, every subtle gesture, was laced with both desire and the knowledge that their bond was being tested against forces neither could fully control. She wanted to cling to him, to bridge the distance, but the weight of mistrust, the accumulation of secrets, and the unspoken consequences formed a barrier that felt insurmountable. The mansion, once a place of intrigue and allure, now seemed to echo the fracture of their connection, the shadows lengthening to match the uncertainty in her heart. A sudden sound, faint yet distinct, a door closing somewhere in the mansion, pulled Elena's attention. A reminder that they were not alone, that the world beyond their fragile connection was ever present, ever threatening. She inhaled sharply, drawing the chill of the night air deep into her lungs, and realized that the fall was not a single moment, but a series of choices, misunderstandings, and hidden truths, each layering upon the other until the delicate balance of trust and intimacy could no longer hold. Adrian's gaze met hers again, steady, unreadable, and in that exchange, Eleanor understood that their hearts had collided against a reality neither could fully control. The room seemed to tilt slightly in the hush that followed, a quiet acknowledgement that the fall had begun. She felt the weight of loss, longing and desire pressing together, a mix of emotions that left her breathless and uncertain. And as Adrian stepped back, the space between them now wider, heavier, Elena realized that the mansion, the secrets, and their intertwined fates had brought them to a precipice. A point where hearts must endure pain, reflection, and the ache of separation before any hope of reconciliation could exist. The fall was complete, a fracture of connection and trust, leaving only the echoes of longing and the promise of what might be rebuilt. The mansion lay in a rare stillness, the storm long past, leaving only a quiet drizzle tapping softly against the windows. Elena moved through the dim corridors with measured steps, the echoes of the fall still lingering in her chest, each heartbeat a reminder of the distance now stretched between her and Adrian. The silence was both oppressive and intimate, a canvas upon which every unspoken word, every withheld confession painted itself with invisible ink. She knew she had to confront him, to step into the space where truths could finally be revealed, however fragile or painful they might be. Adrian stood near the grand staircase, his posture taut, hands loosely clasped, gaze fixed on the muted reflection of rain on the marble below. When he noticed her, the subtle shift in his expression betrayed the quiet storm he carried within, a mixture of regret, longing, and the remnants of unvoiced emotion. Elena's chest tightened, the ache of separation and betrayal mingling with the pull of desire that had never truly ebbed. She hesitated for a moment, the distance between them heavy with the weight of everything unsaid, before taking the final steps that closed the space. "I need to hear it," she whispered, voice trembling yet firm. "The truth. No more secrets, no more half measures. I need to know why. Why everything has been like this." Her words were delicate but resolute, a fragile bridge over the chasm that had formed between them. Adrian's eyes softened, the stern mask he wore slipping just enough to reveal the man beneath. The one shaped by duty, danger, and the rare vulnerability reserved for moments like this. He inhaled slowly, the silence stretching as though the mansion itself were holding its breath. "It's never been about you," he began, voice low and careful, weighted with sincerity. "Everything I've done, every choice, every concealment, it's been to protect you, to keep you from being caught in a world that would destroy what I care for most." Eleanor felt her throat constrict, the raw edge of emotion cutting through layers of anger, doubt, and longing. She wanted to cry, to speak, to forgive, but the truth pressed against her in a tangible way, demanding understanding before any response could form. She stepped closer, drawn by the gravity of his presence, by the sincerity in his tone. The warmth that had been absent during the fall returned, subtle yet undeniable, threading through the tension that still clung to the room. "I trusted you," she whispered, "even when I didn't understand, even when I feared I shouldn't. And now I see. I see the cost of the trust, the weight you bear, and I—" Her voice faltered, the vulnerability she had kept hidden now laid bare. "I can't turn away. Not now." Adrian's hand reached out, hovering near hers, and the space between them seemed to vibrate with a quiet intensity. "You won't have to," he said, finally closing the distance, fingertips brushing lightly against hers. "I can't promise the world will be easy, but I can promise you. You will never face it alone." The words settled between them, fragile yet profound, weaving together the frayed threads of trust, longing, and quiet understanding. In the hush of the mansion, amidst the subtle echoes of the storm outside, the silence became a space of revelation, a testament to honesty, vulnerability, and the beginning of reconciliation. Elena felt the tension in her chest ease, a slow release that left room for warmth, hope, and the fragile promise of healing. The mansion, with its towering walls and shadows, seemed to breathe with them, acknowledging the truths finally spoken and the unspoken bond reinforced in quiet acknowledgement. They stood together, not yet free of the weight of the past, but united by the honesty that had been absent for far too long. The subtle warmth of connection, tempered by the remnants of pain, enveloped them, a delicate reminder that even in a world of secrecy and danger, love could endure if nurtured by truth and courage. As the rain softened to a gentle drizzle outside, Elena and Adrian remained in the quiet, letting the silence speak for them, each heartbeat a testament to the fragile, enduring connection that had survived betrayal, doubt, and fear. The mansion, once a place of shadows and secrets, now held a different weight, one of understanding, reconciliation, and the slow, deliberate return of hope. And in that silence, with truth finally laid bare, Elena realized that the path forward was not simple, not easy, but profoundly theirs, grounded in honesty and the tentative promise of love reborn. The mansion's grand doors creaked open under the weight of evening, revealing a figure Elena had not expected to see standing there. Adrian, taller and darker against the fading light, moved forward with the deliberate precision that had always commanded attention, yet now carried an edge of urgency and danger. The world outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them in the quiet expanse of marble and shadow. Every heartbeat, every tremor of breath underscored the tension between relief and fear, longing and caution. She wanted to run into his arms, yet every instinct warned that this reunion could come with unseen costs. Adrian's eyes, sharp and unreadable, softened only for the briefest fraction of a second when they met hers. "You shouldn't have come here alone," he said, voice low, edged with concern and something unspoken. Perhaps fear, perhaps frustration. Elena stepped closer, drawn by the gravity of his presence, the lingering ache of separation, and the undeniable pull that had defined their connection from the beginning. "I had to," she whispered, the words almost lost in the cavernous hall. "I couldn't stay away. Not after everything. I need to face this, all of it, with you." Their proximity made the air between them almost electric, charged with desire and caution, intimacy and hesitation. Adrian's hand hovered near hers, hesitant, a subtle tension marking the dangerous boundary between personal and professional worlds colliding. The mansion itself seemed to lean in, listening, aware of the fragile bridge they were rebuilding. Elena could feel the pull of the unspoken, the weight of history, the threats that lingered just beyond the walls. Yet in this moment, the gravity of presence, of reunion, outweighed the shadows of the past. They moved together into a smaller room, a space removed from the grand halls and public gaze, where the flicker of candlelight softened their outlines, and shadows danced like memories on the walls. Adrian's gaze remained fixed on her, intense and unwavering, as though reading every tremor of emotion, every micro-expression that betrayed her vulnerability. Elena felt the storm of longing, caution, and unspoken desire in her chest, each beat a reminder that love, though tested, could not be denied. She sensed that the reunion was not simply an emotional necessity. It was a confrontation with the risks they had avoided, the truths they had feared, and the dangerous pull that bound them together. "Everything has changed," he said finally, voice low, carrying the weight of decisions, obligations, and the undeniable tension between them. "Nothing is simple anymore, but neither is letting you go." Eleanor's fingers brushed against his, tentative at first, then firmer as the pull of intimacy and trust overcame hesitation. The touch was a spark, igniting a fragile reconciliation, a promise that whatever dangers lingered outside these walls could not sever the bond that had grown between them. The mansion, with its shadows and echoes, became witness to this delicate balance. Love reclaimed amidst the weight of danger. Their eyes held, communicating more than words could, a conversation of unspoken confessions, regrets, and desires. Adrian stepped closer, the faintest brush of his coat against her shoulder sending shivers down her spine. Eleanor felt her chest tighten, both from the risk of vulnerability and the undeniable yearning she had fought to suppress. The moment was suspended, fragile and potent, a delicate negotiation of trust and longing. Outside, the city hummed softly, unaware of the quiet intensity contained within the mansion's walls. They moved together toward the window, rain from earlier nights still glimmering on the glass, reflecting fragmented light across their faces. Adrian's hand found hers, tentative yet insistent, a grounding touch amidst the uncertainty that had defined their recent days. Elena leaned slightly into him, feeling the slow release of tension, the fragile hope of love tested and surviving. The reunion was dangerous, not in passion alone, but in the delicate truth that both carried, the weight of secrecy, the fragile balance between desire and survival. And in the hush of the room, with shadows flickering and rain-drenched reflections shimmering around them, they both understood that love, though perilous, could endure if held with courage, honesty, and the willingness to confront every risk together. The mansion was quiet in the early hours, the first hints of dawn brushing pale gold across the marble floors and casting long, soft shadows along the walls. Elena stood by the window, the city beyond still wrapped in mist, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a fragile sense of peace. Adrian stepped quietly behind her, his presence steady, familiar, and yet no longer threatening. The distance that had grown between them in the days of betrayal and doubt had softened, replaced by a tentative closeness that pulsed with both warmth and caution. They did not speak immediately, the silence between them heavy but comfortable, filled with the knowledge of what had been lost and what had been regained. Adrian's hand brushed lightly against hers, a subtle acknowledgement of the bond they had endured. And Eleanor felt a shiver of relief, anticipation, and quiet joy all at once. It was not an instant resolution, nor a simplification of the dangers and secrets that lingered in the shadows of his world. But it was a step towards something enduring. Love tempered by understanding, desire, and the lessons of past mistakes. "Do you trust me now?" Adrian asked, voice low, carrying both hope and the lingering weight of responsibility. Elena turned, meeting his eyes, the storm of emotion she had felt over weeks distilled into a fragile clarity. She nodded slowly, the movement deliberate, a confirmation not just of trust, but of willingness to step forward together despite the risks. "I do," she whispered, her voice carrying the tenderness, courage, and vulnerability that had been absent in their previous exchanges. It was not a proclamation of perfection, but a promise of honesty, presence, and commitment in the face of uncertainty. They moved through the mansion together, exploring the familiar halls with a renewed sense of connection. Each room, each shadowed corner now seemed less threatening, the weight of secrets softened by understanding and reconciliation. Adrian shared quiet glimpses of his world, allowing her a controlled view into the life that had so often seemed inaccessible. Elena absorbed each word, each gesture, feeling the invisible threads between them grow taut with trust, strengthened by endurance, and colored by a shared vulnerability that neither could ignore. Outside, the morning sun broke through the lingering mist, scattering light across the mansion's exterior and illuminating the gardens that had once seemed foreboding. Eleanor and Adrian stepped onto the terrace together, the warmth of sunlight mixing with the residual chill of dawn, creating a space that felt both intimate and expansive. The mansion, once a symbol of danger and secrecy, now held promise, a testament to the resilience of connection, the patience of hearts tested, and the quiet strength of love rekindled. Elena felt the final tension of doubt release, replaced by a deliberate awareness of the fragile yet enduring bond between them. Adrian's hand found hers, fingers entwining, and in that simple touch, the weight of fear, betrayal, and longing was eased. They stood together, watching the city awaken beneath the soft glow of morning, a shared understanding between them that the path forward would not be without challenges, but that it would be walked side by side. As the first birds stirred in the trees and sunlight spilled across the terraces, Eleanor and Adrian shared a quiet smile, one that acknowledged the past and embraced the possibility of a future built on trust, honesty, and enduring affection. Their hearts, once tested and torn, now beat in subtle synchrony, the rhythm a reminder that even amidst danger, secrecy, and pain, love had survived and grown stronger. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, amidst the warmth of sun and the lingering cool of morning, it began again. Delicate, tentative, yet undeniable.